All right, so it's 12:30 and we'll kick off, and I just want to welcome everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today. Welcome. We're super excited to be bringing you Finding Balance in Business, Health and Wellbeing with Technology. This webinar session today is made possible with the support of the State Government of Victoria and their Digital Innovation Festival 2020. There's a host of events running at the moment statewide until September 4th, and you can check out more at dif.vic.gov.au. Just a bit of housekeeping before we get going. We'll be using the Q&A function down the bottom there and some polls, and while I'm organising polls, Paul will take over the reins and ask a few questions. You can check those details down in the toolbar there. You can also raise your hand. There's a feature there to do that, and we'll be we won't be using the chat feature today, so if you can just send your quick questions through using the Q&A function. Don't forget to put your Zoom on gallery view so that you can see all the panelists all at the same time. And that's about it for our housekeeping. All right, let's get going. Without further ado, introducing our panelists, we welcome Kylie Glover. As a leader in digital business transformation, Kylie brings international experience and a passion for high performance to her role as Managing Director of Polar Electro Australia and New Zealand. Kylie has business operation and transformation experience in Australia and in the US, and a strong background in digital and omni-channel sales and marketing. Over the last 2 years, Kylie has worked with both elite sports professionals and end users to re-establish Polar's long-standing reputation as a market leader in wearable technology. Welcome, Kylie.
Thanks so much, Leighton. And yeah, we've certainly come a long way in the 40 or so years that Polar has been around. And you know, Polar invented the first wireless heart rate monitor. And obviously, wearable tech's come a long way. And looking forward to talking with you today about how wearables really play a role in achieving sustainable performance and balance in our lives.
Great, thanks so much. Thanks so much. And we also have Dr. Lyndell Bruce. Dr. Bruce is a senior lecturer in sports science and a member of the Centre for Sport Research at Deakin University. She takes a multidisciplinary approach to education research with a background in performance analysis and skill acquisition. Lyndell is also the high performance manager and a coach for Borundura, I think I've got that right, Express Netball Club, and also in the Victorian Netball League. Thanks very much, Dr. Lyndell Bruce.
No worries. Thanks, Leighton. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to this because I think academics and teachers are someone who often don't have a great work-life balance. So happy to try and share some strategies that I use to try and get some balance when there's an often expectation from students that we're online 24/7 to answer their questions and problem solve their assignments and so forth. And I guess a lot of my research doesn't use apps and technologies around looking at athlete monitoring, athlete wellbeing, and load management in particular.
Fantastic. And finally, Steve Sammartino. Steve is one of the world's most engaging and thought-provoking keynote speakers on future. He has spoken to over 200,000 people and wowed audiences around the globe. Steve has spoken in Asia, India, Europe, Africa, in the US, and regularly in China. Steve Sammartino's projects have earned over 20 million plays on YouTube. He's sent a Lego space shuttle to space, created a car that runs on air, made and sold startups, and his time in corporate, like all of us, and inspired many of the world's largest companies looking to adapt to a changing future. Steve regularly commentates on technology on radio, ABC Radio National, 3AW, and The Project. Welcome, Steve.
G'day, Leighton. How are you?
Good, thanks.
Exciting time.
Very exciting.
We're in the middle of a brain-machine interface revolution, quantified self, merging with the machines, shall we say. So I think we've got to be a bit careful, right? How are we going to find that balance? Because with all technology, there's upside and there's downside. And I'm just really interested in finding that balance between the ultimate sensing device, which is the human body, and the augmentation we can use with digital devices. So I think this is a really interesting chat, given the amount of technology interface we have day to day. I mean, we're doing it right now. And, finding that balance to enhance our lives, I think is an important one.
Yeah, fantastic. That's great. Okay, so just a quick thoughts from yourselves. Where are we now? Where is the focus with health and wellbeing and technology now? And is it shifting? Has it shifted? And moving to managing some of these factors with technology-based solutions. I'll start with you, Lyndell.
Yeah, I think it's a challenging time, which has obviously been heightened with COVID. We're at home a lot more, or a lot of us are at home a lot more. We're engaging with more screen time. We're losing all the incidental walking that we have. And particularly for me, so I'm based in Melbourne, we're in stage 4 lockdown, so restricted on how much we can get out and about. So I find that I'm sitting so many hours in a day, and it's driving me insane at the minute. That just finding ways to get up, move within the confines of the house,
Yep.
so that I'm not sitting on the couch in front of a screen while the TV's on and those sorts of things. So
Yep.
I think everything's particularly heightened at the minute, and it's just increasing our own individual awareness of it, so that we then can create some strategies to get away from the screen, get off the couch, and get up and moving.
Yep, fantastic. And your thoughts on that, Kylie?
Yeah, I absolutely agree with Lyndell, and we've seen spikes in our own data that have shown that people have been inspired over these last few months to either focus or refocus on their physical and mental well-being.
Yep.
Which is fantastic. And the other thing in terms of how it's shifting is, we're seeing adoption on a massive scale in terms of technology.
Yep.
And so what that means is, where we have that adoption, we also, have more accessibility, and also price points come down. So it becomes, much more accessible to everyone. And I think wearables are a great example of that. You can get something now, around the $200, $300 mark, with features that we would once pay, over $1,000 for. So I think that's really exciting. But what I think in terms of technology as a whole, and to Steve's point earlier, it can be good and bad, and the technology is really breaking down these silos. I think before, we used to have fairly clear boundaries of, what we were doing. If we're at work, we're at work. If we're working out, we're working out. And if we're at home, we're doing things that we do at home with our families. And now those boundaries are becoming increasingly blurred. So, it's like, how do we cut through the noise? And, really manage that always on mentality, and, finding the importance of being present, really.
Yep. Steve, your thoughts?
I'm pretty excited by what's happening with wearables for a couple of reasons. I think that the attention that the screen steals away from humans I think it's a little bit corrosive. No doubt reading and learning is wonderful, and having access to information on demand is great, but I don't think most of us are using it that way. We're all a little bit guilty of indulging in YouTube and TikTok or what have you. But the idea of a wearable, I mean, I've got one on now, is that it operates a little bit more the way the human body does, where it's about sensors and haptics. It's about having that interaction, little feelings, like we have with sweat and touch and, your heart pumping and all of that. It feels like it might be a really important way for us to separate ourselves from the screen and get the kind of feedback that we need to get moving. So I feel like there's actually almost like a positive externality that can come from that shift. The other thing that I think is really interesting is I think there's a real dichotomy that's appeared in society with body health and body image. And it seems as though this dichotomy has got a negative and positive side. On the one hand, we've got the quantified self movement helping us and trying to make us fitter. And during COVID, it's become evident. But then we've got this kind of extreme view that we shouldn't be judging people on how they look, and we shouldn't. But there are certain health consequences that are undeniable and unavoidable. And I think we need to have a mature discussion about that.
That's fantastic. That's great. All right, so let's get into the meat of the discussion. We're talking about tech today and how we can use technology to be healthier. And also a bit later on, we'll sort of delve into that, stepping away from technology a bit as well too. So looking at hardware, there's so much hardware out there now that we can use, and wearables are examples of that, and different types of wearables as well too. And there's all sorts of trends that are emerging and all sorts of metrics that are being measured. We've got Polar, obviously a big player in that market. We're looking at things like iFit with guided workouts on equipment as well too. Even some of the gaming devices like Nintendo, there's games that you can play where you can get the kids up and exercising as opposed to just being on a controller. Kylie, can you comment on where that market is going at the moment and some of the emerging technologies that you're seeing?
Yeah, absolutely, Leighton. Look, I think we all know that fitness is good for many other things in our lives in terms of increased energy and cognition and productivity and helps our sleep. And I think the direction that it's heading in is a much more holistic approach. Particularly for Polar, where our DNA is really in sports science, and I'm seeing it really shift from those elite performance athletes using this data to really get that edge, and sometimes that edge is 0.something% in a particular area. Yep. To really having a much more holistic approach and getting back as well to those key pillars, and even at an elite performance level, or if you're just starting out, things that are important are your sleep, are your recovery, and your nutrition. So that's why integration across apps, so you can get a full view of what's happening. So integration with something like MyFitnessPal, so you can see your nutrition and how it relates to how well you're working out. And sleep tracking from your wrist is so essential, I think, in terms of seeing how that then impacts your performance in other areas of your life. So yeah, it's absolutely critical to have that full view, and we're getting much better at creating that. But we also have a challenge in terms of what's the point of data unless you know what to do with it.
Right.
So it's about presenting it in a way that's meaningful to people. We've got something like 80% of the population are willing to wear a wearable device, and the vast majority of people who wear them say it helps to engage them with their health, and that's just fantastic. The implications.
That's a great point, isn't it? I mean, I think. Potentially we're all wearing a wearable. Kylie, I imagine you've got a Polar device on at the moment.
I do.
In fact, I've got a Polar device on at the moment too. So that's probably just as well. Steve, you're wearing one. Lyndell, I think you've got an Apple Watch on. And
Polar, but I'm wearing one.
and so, as you say, this is more prevalent in society, and we're starting to get prompts and things, aren't we? Lyndell, you mentioned this to me that if you're sitting down for too long, your watch prompts you to stand up and walk about. And of course, with all of these webinars and Zoom meetings that we're having, that's really important, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's one thing I've noticed. I might have back-to-back meetings in the office, but quite often I'm changing room and moving somewhere else. I'm literally sitting on the couch, clicking leave and entering the next one. So I do find that, getting that reminder that I've been sitting for an hour or just under an hour to get up and move around. And sometimes you can't, but it is really important to just get up as much as you can, as I mentioned before, the incidental sitting has gone. And I think just to touch back on Kylie's point as well, often elite athletes have had access to all this tech, and now we're really starting it to come down to the consumer level. And if you were to see the amount of data that's collected on an athlete on a daily basis, from having GPS devices when they're training, to their diet, to their sleep, to their mood, to their injuries, it's a fascinating point around. We've got so many thousands of data points, but these often all operate in separate databases. So we need to find that way for them to chat and connect and talk together. But it's then presenting that information in a meaningful way to coaches and athletes. And I think that's going to be even more important at a consumer level as well, because often the consumer doesn't have the training in sport and exercise to really understand how they can use their data. So I've got 8 hours sleep, but what does that actually mean? Was it quality sleep? Did I get a good quantity of sleep? So, and we know different people need more sleep. I'm one that needs more sleep. I'm not going to deny that. And 8 hours quite often isn't enough for me. And just finding out what works for you as an individual, and can you, if you only get 6 hours, which for some people we know they can operate normally off that, can you supplement that with a nap in the afternoon to then get you through? But for other people, that's not going to work. So I think it's about, as all this tech becomes much more available to the consumer, the education pieces around it are critical, so that people aren't going, oh, I only got 8 hours of sleep, I need more, when they may in fact be okay.
And that's an interesting point you raise about even things like sleep performance, if I can use that term. And I know when I got my polar unit, the new one that's just come out, is I was interested in the report that I got out of it, and I thought I was getting a good night's sleep. And as it turns out, I'm actually getting a lot of interruptions. The amount of deep sleep I get versus light sleep was a bit of a shock to me, and it's sort of given me pause for thought to actually develop a bit of a routine when I'm going to bed and putting the devices down and make sure that I'm in a good headspace, so that when I do go to sleep, I don't have a lot of things on my mind, and I actually get a better night's sleep as a result. And also that integration piece too, getting some of that information about what I'm eating. So I've got output, I'm burning calories, but what's the input? Because the input might be more than the output, and of course we all know how that works. Steve, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, a lot of people need 8 hours of sleep a day, not me, 4 hours. So long as I get 8 at night, 4 hours in the day is sufficient. That's what I always said there. So, you know what's interesting with the sleep one? I reckon we need to be choosy on where we use data. Like, we've got 3 billion years of evolution up our sleeves, and our bodies know a lot. I know if I've had a good night of sleep based on how I feel the next day. It really, for me, is that simple. We need to be careful, and I'll tell you why, because I think there are areas where we can improve performance, or areas where what we're getting indicated through our body isn't helping us, and that's where we need to use technology. Technology always has been and always should be something that augments humanity, not replaces humanity. Because there's a danger there, and let's just think about the sugar rush we went on from 1950 to 1990, right? Processed food and everything, technology doing it for us instead of us having our own mind to think about it. We can do evolution a disservice if we outsource everything to the machine and forget about listening to our bodies. Like, our bodies know more than the technology, and always will. And so there's going to be an art in this balancing. And so I'm really careful. Like, I don't use any of those sleeping apps or any of that stuff. I've even got that terrible habit of having my phone next to my bed. It's the first thing and the last thing I touch at night. It used to be my wife. Now it's the phone. I'm sorry. And so
I don't think that's uncommon, Steve. I think a lot of us are reaching for our phones first thing in the morning.
I know, it's terrible, right? Population crisis over. And so I'm just trying to use it in areas where I want to increase my performance. So I use it with running, at gym, and I use it with surfing.
Yes, you told me you've got a surfing app to tell you when the waves are up.
Yeah, so it gives me an alert so that I know when the waves are up, when they're going to be good, which time, the tides, or when I go surfing, it tracks how many waves I get.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, it does a whole lot of good stuff. I mean, it helps me understand which places I surf better at, because it's got the geolocator, and it'll say, hey, you get 30% more waves when you surf here versus here. And there's all this really interesting stuff where you can get more out of yourself, because I would never have known that. Like, I would have never have known that when I surf at Jan Jack, I get a much better result than when I surf at Winky Pop, and the amount of people in the water and all. It's like, I didn't realize that. That makes me happier. That releases the endorphins. I'm getting a better result. I'm using the tech in a way that my body can't know, unlike sleep.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, I think you make a really interesting point there, Steve, and I think the sports science as well does reflect that yes, data can be useful as long as it's complementing how you're feeling, those subjective measures, and when those are out of alignment, then maybe that's a sign to go looking for more, looking as to why am I still feel I've got a great sleep but I'm not feeling great. What's happening there? Or my heart rate was higher than it normally would be on this run. What's going on there? And so using it as pointers. There's an adage actually about it's often used around meditation in terms of the mind is a wonderful servant but a terrible master. I think the same applies for technology. Like, it's got to work for us and not be dictating us.
Yeah, and it might even take things to diet or whatever if you're not sleeping well, or other work stress. You've had the sleep, but then you're still not, or it's somewhere else.
Something's off.
That's a good point.
Yeah, I was going to say, you ask any sports scientist and they'll get the data on an athlete, and that just prompts them to have an extra conversation. They're not going to change something because the data says. And there has been research that show that the subjective measures, the how you're feeling, are a better indicator of an athlete's preparedness to train or well-being than the scales that we create and get them to report on.
Yeah, and I think it's about kind of just to your point there, Lyndell, just bringing us back into alignment, because Steve, you're absolutely right. We know intuitively what's good, how we feel, all of these things, but in a way, so often we're saying no to that. We're saying no to our bodies. We're pushing through, and work's a great example of that. We're trying to find balance, but we're really, really trying to perform to our best level in every area. So where data can be helpful is, I need to pull that back a little bit, and I did feel a bit tired. I have been feeling a bit run down. And connecting back with ourselves, and data can be useful for that.
Yeah, I just wanted to raise and ask Lyndell and Kylie is, in the AFL, the sports science thing has become really prevalent in the last decade or two. But one thing I just cannot get my head around, and I'd be really interested to get your scientific views on this, is when someone kicks a goal, and now I don't know how many people are Victoria, I imagine most of us are, whether or not you hate football, they will run the person off the field because their heart rate's too high or something. And I just can't help but think that there's an emotional side to life and peak performance and the endorphins that you're getting, and maybe your competitor is a bit worried because you just kicked the goal. And I think there's a level, and I'm really curious about this. Is it madness to take someone off once they've just kicked a goal, when they're up and about, they're excited, their endorphins are running, the competitor on the field is thinking, gee, he's got me here, or she's got me here? I just can't help but think that that's a misuse of reading of the data, and that the AFL sports scientists have got that incredibly wrong. And please, you know what answer I'm looking for here. Let's just be clear.
I'm happy to take first crack. I think the AFL media has a lot to answer for in the way that they've framed this. Blaming the sports scientists, because they don't go and ask the sports scientists what's really happening. So I'm going to put some blame back on the AFL media. But to my knowledge, a lot of it is actually pre-planned rotations based upon players reaching their maximal. And then if they do stay on, and we've got to remember, if we look at this year, and I'm going to get onto a side rant about the state of the game at the minute, but there's so few goals in the AFL at the minute that there isn't the same opportunities for rotations that there has been previously. So it's an easy time, if you like. So most of them are actually pre-planned based upon players' maximums. They're hitting their maximum speeds or intensities, that if they leave them on longer, they're actually going to have a reduced performance or recovery.
But that's interesting, right? Because you might say that they have a reduced performance based on their heart rate, but that's excluding the mental state of the game and what the opposition is feeling at that time when they've been bested by someone else. And if it's predetermined based on a heart rate, then it's not taking into account the conditions of what's happening on the field and the psychology. And surely we've seen people go beyond their maximum based on the psychological impact of those positive vibes that go. I think this is really interesting here. And this is the separation of the physicality and the mental side of business, of sport, is something we need to really think through.
All right, guys, I'm just going to interject there because it's a very, very deep rabbit hole, that one about challenges in the AFL, and tempting as it is to go down. We do have a question that's come through from Courtney, and she's talking about wearables and triathlon and some of the data that she's getting through that. So I'm just going to flick that on, Courtney. All right, have we got you off mute there?
I have, mate. I'm just a really recreational triathlete, like, you know, come last. I just do it for my mental health. We've got a great place here in the Mallee to ride and run and swim. I am after a new watch, but I don't want all the data because I feel like it'll overwhelm me because I'm an online uni student as well, and I'm doing play groups online at the moment with Facebook. I'm over being connected to stuff. But in the future, like when I do need to purchase a new watch, is there a way to not be connected but still wear it all the time? Because I'm taking it on and off all the time because I don't want to be, I don't know how to explain it. I just don't need to be overstimulated and connected to it.
It makes total sense, Courtney. And we actually find it's kind of ironic. Like one of the most requested features in our wearables was, I want my phone notifications. I want my phone notifications on my watch. We put it in there. And we can see most athletes will turn it off when, particularly when they're training. You just want to be present in what you're doing at the time. And often it's an opportunity for you to be disconnected from everything else that's going on. So I don't think you're old fashioned at all. I think you reflect the mentality of a lot of people out there. And yeah, certainly there are watches out there where, it's just an option. You can have it permanently off. And yeah, I would certainly recommend that if it's finding balance and switching off is something that's important to you.
Thanks so much for that question, Courtney, and keep those questions coming through. What we're going to do now, and I'll get Paul to take over the reins, but I'm going to launch a poll and see how honest people can be. It's just who's exercising daily or even weekly at the moment. Things like walking, running, cycling, hiking, could be weights at home. Aerobics, who knows, could be nothing. So let's see how honest our audience is. I'll launch that poll, and Paul, I might hand it over to you.
Okay, Leighton, I might get a touch controversial while people throw in this poll. Steve, with one eye to the future, where could this data be used by employers in the workplace to really turn things on their head? Leighton and I have discussed maybe logistics companies might want to be monitoring their drivers for how many hours, how their sleep was, how many hours they've been driving. Even life insurers might be using this data in different ways to insure somebody or reject them. I mean, how do you see the need to use data wisely?
Yeah, I think that data, when used well, makes the world better. It's just nothing clearer, whether it's business, environmental, health. Absolutely makes the world better. So I just moved that screen to the side. But I'm going to pick up on one word that you said there. You said employers. And I don't think the data should be used by employers at all. I actually think that any personal data that comes out of your body, you should be the user. It should be employees. And in fact, if anything, and if unions were smart, they'd be using this data for their employees to afford them the protections and the working conditions that a civil society wants. And so my view is the person who creates the data should own it and should use it and be the beneficiary of it. And I don't think that employers should be able to use data, because that takes us back to 1910 with Frederick W. Taylor and his clipboard and scientific management and saying you get 6 minutes rest after putting in 36 bolts in a car door. And I don't think that's a society I want to live in. So I think that we can use it, I think, to make sure work is safe, to make sure we have the right level of rest, moving around, all of those elements that we can, but I think that it should be owned and controlled by the employer so that they can get fair and civilized working conditions.
We've got, thanks Steve so much for that. Just very briefly, okay, so lots of people walking. We've got quite a few people running as well and doing weights, so that's encouraging. I think a couple of people may have owned up and said they're not exercising regularly. So, of course, we want to encourage those people to get out and about and do some exercise. So we'll stop sharing those results for the moment. Lyndell, just in response to Steve, what are your thoughts about data and the challenges in whose data it is and how that's shared?
Well, I think I'm with Steve on this one completely. There is a lot of ethical issues around the use of data and how it's used. And I think if employees are sharing data with employers, there's such a risk that it would be used negatively for performance management purposes that aren't ethical, and that you want to get rid of someone, so you monitor them more closely and find ways to actually get rid of them. And I know in the sport world, there's a lot tied up with the use of data and how we actually use it. And is it going to become when an athlete wants to change clubs, that we already see it, that the new club will do a complete injury history and often may not elect to select that athlete because of their injury history and their risks. So the more data we collect, there is clubs don't, and the AFL Players Associations naturally in the AFL have a big role to play in how the data is collected and how it's used. And I know there's a reluctance from the AFLPA in particular around sharing of too much data, and it even being used from a performance analysis perspective, where we look at involvements in passages of play and the performance indicators, that they're worried that it's going to be used to then pay players less than their market value. So there's a whole lot of bits and pieces tied up in that it's such a tricky minefield with so many ethical conundrums, that in reality, I'm with Steve, the person who the data is collected on, or the wearable, that they should be the owner of that, and have a say on how it's actually used, but agree with all the points around making safe work environments and work practices safer and all those sorts of things as well. But it's a fine line, and it's a tightrope that needs to be walked very carefully.
And now, Kylie and Lyndell, I suspect with this one, with things like heart rate, you know, a lot of people now know what beats per minute is, and people know how fast or slow they're walking or running or whatever their case is. Years ago, no one had any concept around how hard they were working or how fast they were going. Kylie, now we're starting to see the introduction of things like HRV and heart rate variability. We don't want to go too far down the sports science rabbit hole, but look, essentially what that means is it's the time between beats, isn't it? And so what does that mean for the everyday punter?
Look, for the everyday punter, and I'm fascinated in this area, and having come from it from athlete performance point of view, and then almost every day finding new studies in terms of its applications for overall wellness and performance. I think it's a fascinating area. And so what it is, and Lyndell, you could probably explain this much better than I can, but for the everyday punter, it's looking at how you're reacting to your overall stresses. So it's not just the metrics of how you're working out, your load, and how you're sleeping. It's all of those other stresses that impact us, and they have an impact on our autonomic nervous system. So the system that kind of dictates that fight or flight response. And so by looking at that, originally it was used to be a clue as to an athlete moving towards burnout. And when I say burnout, I don't mean like overtraining. I mean like the burnout that takes 6 months to a year to recover from. And so, heart rate variability is a really high correlation with that. But we also see correlations now in terms of immunity, in terms of just impacts of stress on your life. And so, the everyday person can now measure that as they sleep. And find out just how well recovered their autonomic nervous system is. And I think it's such a great tool when so many of us are in that fight or flight response. Far too often, it's a great clue to then get that feedback loop to say, okay, if I start meditating, if I start sleeping more, is that having an impact over time? We're talking about things that it's not necessarily a day-to-day measure, but if you're looking at trends over time, I think that can be absolutely key in achieving balance and, just longevity in the good habits that you're trying to create.
And Lyndell, this is sort of happening more and more, I think, isn't it, with this kind of trickle down of things that were in the realm of elite sports and then amateur sports and then the everyday consumer. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, definitely. I must admit HIV is something that I did measure myself for a couple of years. And as Kylie alluded to, it does actually give you a clue beforehand that you may be getting sick, and you can, if you recognise that trend over time that you're dipping down, if you take a day or two off, you would often rebound back and prevent that illness before you actually felt any physical signs and symptoms. So I did find it a really good tool, and we are seeing all that wearable tech come down to the consumer level, and as the more tech's developed, we're seeing GPS devices in our watches. We're getting devices now that can measure our jumps, which is a great measure for load for some sports in particular as well, that you don't need to spend $4,000 or $5,000 on a GPS unit. You can spend $100 on a vert device, for example, that does measure your jump load, which we're doing some research at the minute that can show it is an equivalency in netball, basketball and volleyball and those types of sports in particular. So yeah, the wearables, as I've mentioned before, coming down, and it's around educating consumers on what they actually mean. And I think that, as Steve has alluded to as well, there's a big psychological part to play in this. If the data says you're feeling or dropping down, but you're feeling great, what do you go with? Do you then go, well, no, I'm feeling good, so I'm going to push myself, and you may bring on an illness or an injury, or do you go, no, the data's down, so you don't train, you've had a missed opportunity as well. And I think that's where you just need to explore, as I mentioned before, what works for you, and you'll find out, well, if I'm feeling good and the data says I'm not, then I know this works and I might go somewhere in between. And it is a lot of trial and error to find out what does work and what doesn't work.
Thanks very much for that. We've got another question coming through from Brett King. So, Brett, I'm just going to put your microphone on and you can ask directly if you like. Brett.
Sure, thanks, Leighton. Thanks, panel, for joining us. I guess just a wider question. I've been to a number of these sessions where you'll have some futurists talk about where technology improving to the fact you can take your mobile phone with you, and as you walk past Subway, it'll tell you there's a 50% offer on for the sub that you bought 3 weeks ago, and to try and get you back in. And someone like Australians tend to not really engage with those sort of things and not enable them or not want to be seeing them, but they seem to be prevalent in other countries in the world and other cultures. And I'm just wondering the overlay and experience you've got with regard to Australians and how we enact with our privacy and our information sharing versus other cultures, and whether we'll catch up and open ourselves up to what others might be doing, or whether that's very much a country by country based world. And the limitation of how far we can take technology is ourselves as people, not the technology itself.
Yeah, I'm guessing that question is targeted at me. By the way, I'll just point out that I'm not one of the futurists that opines about the opportunity of that and that it's a good business strategy. I mean, I'm the opposite. I'm against that. It actually hasn't worked in many countries at all. If you look at the evidence around most of the developed nations, it's worked in very, very few. The two areas that are exceptions to that rule are developing nations in Asia, where access to people's incomes are a lot smaller, and access to deals actually makes sense. I can remember when Apple launched its beacons, early 2010s, that was going to be the next big thing that never happened. Australians hate pocket spam. No one likes pocket spam. Yep. No one wants interruptions. The only modern country that it's worked in a little bit is America, and that's cultural. And the reason that it's worked in America is simply because they have a coupon cutting out culture, which then got transferred into the digital format. Most other markets it hasn't worked in. I actually think it's a really poor strategy because it's not using the technology for people. It's using it for the corporation. And I don't know that there's that much financial upside. There's certainly no social upside in imploring people to buy something they didn't know they needed. I think we can do better than that with the technology.
Yeah, and that's great. But I guess there's a sport overlay to that, and I certainly appreciate the answer, and that's very applicable. But on the sport overlay, do we want our phones and our watches telling us to stand up? Do we want our phones and watches telling us yesterday you burnt you did 5,000 steps less you should have, and do we think that'll change our behaviour? And I think you get a sugar hit of that behaviour changing when you own a new device. Is that long term, or is that just I
don't think. Look, I'll give you a personal allegory here. My phone does that and says you need to stand up, and when it annoys me too much, I just take it off because I'm sovereign. I'm sovereign over my body, and that personal sovereignty is really important. I think that humans are very, very good at ignoring things that interrupt us too much to a certain point. And this is why one of the first things I think Lyndell and Kylie, we all spoke about, was about choosing which areas you wanted in. Because the one thing that we know for sure is that if you have every alert turned on, then none of the alerts work. So it's about being choosy. And that's one of the things that, we're only 10 years into the smartphone revolution, 13 years and 20 years into the web. It's about having the tech serve us and us not serve it. And that's where we've got to learn about the tech and get better at it. Just like we learned that processed foods weren't that good, and then slow food and, more, cooking made a comeback because we were bloody sick of, Jetsons food. We didn't want that, microwave meals and all that. So it's finding that balance as the technology becomes mature and we mature with it.
Yeah, and to your point, I think, Brett, on the Australian part of that, I think Australians are very early adopters of new technologies, and it's got to serve us. In terms of the activity reminders, it's not something that I've really bought into until I actually started trying it, and I thought I don't want to break my concentration. I'm a hyper focuser, so when I'm in it, I'm going to keep going. And I found getting those alerts and going, okay, I'm going to give this a go. That it did benefit me. So then it is something that I leave on. If it doesn't benefit me, I'll turn it off. And it is about experimentation. And if you find it's increasing your levels of productivity and your energy, then you're going to keep doing it, and you probably won't need an alert anymore. You build that habit over time, right? And you don't need technology then to tell you to get up and move every half hour or hour.
Thanks so much for your question, Brett. Appreciate that one. I'm going to launch another poll and hand the reins over shortly to Paul. So the question is going to be around who uses devices or apps for tracking fitness or meditation or diet or other health aspects. So let's launch that one. And Paul, over to you.
Yeah, okay. I'm going to change the focus a little bit away from wearables and into into apps. Now, the theme today is finding balance in business. Now, a lot of professionals and businesses find themselves working from home now during stage 3 and stage 4. And I'd like to ask the panel about, and some of the listeners around, what they're doing to manage the fact that parents and their children and businesses, we've got this huge intersection of everything happening really now under one roof. We don't have much space. Now, I'm finding things like Google Home, the Wi-Fi. I'm using that to then monitor how much our kids use screen time. And if they do get a bit far away from me, I can actually turn off the Wi-Fi from my phone now, which is fantastic. But just interested to see what the panelists feel around some of the apps and other ways we can get that balance. Parents, children, and professionals all living under one roof. How do we get that balance at home? Right over Lyndell, because you're an educator, tertiary educator working from home at the moment.
I'm fortunate I don't have children. My biggest disruptors are my cats. And so they do like to appear and interrupt. And I think it is super challenging. And I think one thing that I have done is I've actually started using apps for my workouts. I can't go to the gym at the minute, so I do some weight training and I do some HIIT outdoor running sessions, but I've actually incorporated yoga into my routine, and I'm the least flexible person that you do know, and it's the last thing you would normally find me doing, but I've sourced an app that's working for me, and I tried a number of different ones until I found something that did work for me. So bringing something different, yes, in some ways it is more screen time, but you are being active at the same time as using it. And another I mean, like probably a lot of people, there's been a lot of reflection over the last 6 or so months of this, and I've engaged a lot more in some mindfulness activities as well, and there's lots of great apps around in that space. There's Headspace, Smiling Mind, there's probably a whole host of others that other people could recommend as well, and even if it's just putting the headphones on, it could be listening to music, it could be just listening to 5 minutes of mindfulness activities, and I've tried to do them by myself without the guidance, but like most people, your mind just goes racing off into something else work-related.
Yeah, I put my hand up in that bucket as well too. Yeah.
So I think for me, it's trying to find some of those apps that you can just switch off. So yes, you're still screen time, but you're not sitting there reading or watching. You're actually a lot of the time eyes closed or being active in some other space. Yeah, it's really challenging, and I think to increase productivity from a work perspective, just closing off the email when I want to focus on a particular task, or turning off the alerts. Like we use Microsoft Teams, and if you're familiar with that, it has pop-ups and notifications all the time. So just shutting down anything that notifies me about something, and yeah, just trying to concentrate on the task at hand. And I know a lot of the people I work with are working with the kids at home, and they're working till 10, 11 o'clock at night, because that's the only chance. They've got young kids that they're getting their work done, and then they're minimising their sleep. And it's, yeah, I feel for people who are trying to manage.
Thanks so much, Lyndell. You touched on our next topic there, but just before we get into that, so we've got the results here. It looks like a lot of people are using GPS sports watches, so I imagine you'll be happy with that, Kylie, which is good for Polar, of course. Smartphones, no surprise there that we've got a lot of people using smartphones to manage various aspects of their health and well-being. Lots of apps, as you mentioned, some meditation ones there too, things like Calm and Headspace, and Sattva, I think, is another one too. Stopwatches, nothing like going old school. I know Steve's occasionally a big fan of going old school. Who needs anything else? Just a basic stopwatch. Well, you know.
And how's your hourglass? How many? You got a collection of hourglasses there in the background, Steve?
An hourglass.
No, I haven't. No, I haven't.
Tried and tested over many thousands of years.
But you know what? People confuse technology with something new. Technology isn't new. Technology is something that we've built that wasn't just coming out of the ground. And so sometimes the oldest technologies are the best ones we have. And the art of the future is about having a balance across them and keeping some old ones and then getting some new great ones as well, like the ones we've discussed today.
Mm.
So we'll just launch into that sort of topic about actually stepping away from technology. Kyle, it was interesting how you talked about how people requested having notifications on watches, and now people think they want something, but actually what they do is they get the watch and they make sure that notifications element's off, so they can go out and see how fast and how far they're running and what their heart rate is, but they actually leave their phone at home and they don't worry about that stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it really comes down to, and you know, Leighton, you could probably talk to this in terms of your athletic background with Ironman as well. But you know, I think it's you can have lofty goals and really focus on you know, setting those and working towards those. But once you set that, it's been able to put it down and be absolutely present. And that's probably another application across sport. And then, you know, just having balance in everyday life is just that moment, and whatever you're doing, to be absolutely present in it without distraction is really key. We're just far too accessible. And you know, and a lot of the athletes will say, in Ironman in particular, you know, if you actually have to stop thinking about the finish line and focus on this very next step, because you can get through anything for just one more step, and you realize that you know, those levels of challenge or pain change over time, and you don't know what that's going to look like. So you know, sort of letting that go, and I think that has some huge applications to us finding balance in everyday life, and yeah, switching off those notifications and just being where you are and doing what you're doing.
Lyndell, Kylie's raised a point. I'll ask you this in a bit, just around goal setting, which is not strictly speaking just about technology, but that goal setting piece, short-term, medium-term, long-term goals, and the types of goals. I'm going to ask you about that shortly. Steve, the do not disturb feature on our phones, that's really important, isn't it? Or actually putting the phone in another room. I know some people use that as a strategy before they go to bed, is actually they put it in the kitchen or at the opposite end of their house so they're not tempted to pick it up first thing in the morning. I think we've just lost your audio there, Steve. You might have the microphone off.
Sorry, my
there
bad.
we go.
I'm really bad at that. I don't use the do not disturbs as much as I should. Even I have emails and social media and bing while I'm trying to work. I justify it to myself saying I'm going to miss out on something important. But I think we need to almost like make a bargain with ourselves and burn the boat sometimes, and just turn things like make it not possible to access it. And the do not disturb is one of it. But one of the things we do is we go dark. We turn the Wi-Fi off. We first did it for the kids, and we said, "Oh, the internet's too busy. It's broken." Just after they've had too much screen time, we just turned it off. And
I'll have to remember that, Steve.
And what we did was, my wife and I both had our phones, and we're just surfing away. And they're like, "Oh, it's not working." We're like, "Oh, I must just be too busy and all that, whatever." They're young, yeah. But then we thought we should do that ourselves too, and turn it off, and making sure you have dinner with someone. I don't know if people were reading magazines in the 1950s when magazines first came out, what the dinner table. It is just so tempting. It's just so tempting to just pick it up.
Nothing like a conversation killer with
someone
people.
Says something, at the dinner table that might be true. You go, I better check. But we don't need to check.
Don't check it. Don't check it. That's great. And so the other thing too is that you've got things like those blue screen filter technologies where it actually changes the palette on your phone to like warm colours, so it does that blue light doesn't affect you.
Yeah. Look, my eyes have gone terrible. I'm sure someone's going to sue Apple or Google soon, or Samsung for
all the blue light.
My eyes used to work until I got a smartphone.
So, Lyndell, just really quickly, just on that goal setting piece, because we're going to start wrapping things up now. We haven't got that many minutes to go, and I'll get a couple of tips of each of you, things that people can do who are listening in that they can actually take away and do some things, maybe go for a walk straight afterwards to stretch their legs. Lyndell, goal setting. Tell us a bit about that.
I'm probably not the best person to ask. I don't tend to set a lot of goals, but we know it's important, and certainly people are more productive or can be more productive when they do set some goals. And I think there might be a long-term goal, but there has to be achievable steps along the way. And I think I actually listened to a webinar late last week, I think it was as well, and it really resonated with me, is that if you're trying to improve your diet or improve your fitness, you don't have to get out and run a marathon tomorrow or cut everything, all the sugar or whatever it is that's your vice, out of your diet. I think if you can just start making one small step at a time for a period of weeks. So it might be, well, rather than reaching for the cake or the chocolate at 3 o'clock, you go for the nuts, or you go for a walk around the block or something, just so it's part breaking the habit, but it's not cutting everything out all at once, or doing, if you're going from no exercise to doing 7 days of vigorous exercise in that next week, it's going to be quite small and achievable, so that you get the endorphins and the positive that, oh yeah, I did grab some nuts instead of the biscuits or the cake today, and then just trying to build on that and make that consistent for a period of time, and then pick something else. Then
it becomes sort of habitual, doesn't it? That's really the trick, is we have bad habits, but we can also form good habits as well too.
Yeah, and saying maybe cut back Zoom as well, or maybe cut back 8 Zooms a day to 4.
I think everyone wants to cut back on Zoom at the moment, don't they?
Yeah. So, I mean, yeah, there is a lot of that, and it is very challenging. I think a lot of it does come back to habits as well, and there is some great books and resources out there on trying to identify what the trigger is of the habit, because until you identify the trigger, you're not going to be able to break that particular habit.
So we're just in our last 5 minutes now, so we're just wrapping things up, and we have some super smart people in this sports and tech space with us. So just a couple of tips from each of you about things that we can do after the call today, tomorrow, next week. How do we go about improving our health and well-being and finding, as we say with the topic, finding balance in business? So I'll hand it over to you, Kylie.
Look, I think the first thing, and I think a lot of people who are struggling to find balance often, have that perfectionist sort of drive, and sometimes something is better than nothing, and giving yourself permission to say, yeah, actually, I've got to look after myself before I can kind of look after everyone else or be the best in business that I can be. That is a priority. Giving yourself permission for that to be a priority, I think, is so important. Without guilt and with absolute discipline, because you will be tested. When you decide to make your health a priority, that decision will be tested, and you've got to have your list of your whys and make it sustainable.
And Steve, your thoughts, what are your tips for, what do people do when they finish on this webinar?
Look, I think if you want balance, use the technology the same way you'd use a sport. Don't try and use it all. Choose a couple that you really enjoy and those that you think will have an impact in areas where there's a lack. And I reckon the tech can really augment. I know personally with my surfing, it's just made me enjoy it more, get more out of it, catch more waves, feel better, all of that. So don't be a slave to it. Just be choosy, like you are with your diet and like you are with your friends and like you are. Be choosy. Go, this one here, this app, that's going to track, and I'm going to get more out of life because of that. But don't just go, oh, apps have arrived. I need an app for everything in my life. That's just madness. So be choosy. That's my one piece of advice. And have the balance. Remember, your body's got a job to do and the tech's got a job to do. Just keep the balance.
Fantastic. And Lyndell, your thoughts. What do people do after they finish up on this webinar?
I think if people are too concerned about the amount of time they're on tech at the minute, it's identifying a period of time that they can just switch off from it, and it might be a certain time each day that they can just turn off all devices, read a book, not a Kindle book, a real physical book, or do some sort of hobby that they may have, just to switch out of it. And it might only be 5 minutes on the first day, but if you feel like you need to build that up over time. And I think another thing that we've spoken about in the past is setting boundaries. If you are contactable 24/7 and you want to change that, give some parameters. And you might have people, family, that they can contact you 24/7, that's okay, but put some parameters around business partners or colleagues or work, and trust that whoever you put in charge can manage that situation for you. And then I think that will improve the relationship you have with any business partners or colleagues or employers, and it will help you as well.
Well, look, fantastic to have you guys with us today. Really wonderful and thank you so much for your contributions and painting that landscape for us about where we're going with apps and hardware, and also how we can take some time away from those things. I just want to thank the State Government of Victoria and the Digital Innovation Festival team again. Really, thank you so much for their support in making this webinar possible. The Digital Innovation Festival is on until September 4th, so you can go to dif.vic.gov.au and check out all the events that are happening. There's more events today and right through till September 4th. So, look, thanks again, guys. I believe I don't think we captured quite all of this, but some of this will be up on Facebook. And if you have any additional questions, feel free to send them through and we'll try and get to those after the event. So thanks so much. Have a great day. I think everyone's going to go out for a walk now after this. And we look forward to bringing you the next Regional Rising live soon. Cheers, guys.
Thanks everybody.
Thanks, everyone. See you later.
Thank you.
See you later.